Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Command and Conquer Rivals is the game. And this video is sponsored by EA, and in it, I'm gonna give you some tips on getting started in Command and Conquer Rivals. If you haven't seen my previous videos, I've been playing this game a lot, played all the way up to Gold League already, and I think I've learned some things along the way. Now, that said, we're gonna talk through 10 things I think you need to know to get started and play well at a competitive level in Command and Conquer Rivals. Beyond that, we're also going to just walk through one of the decks I've built previously, and then finally maybe talk about some map strategies as well. So that said, up first, 10 things you need to know in Command and Conquer Rivals. Well, number one, I think you need to build a deck and know that deck's style. In other words, you need to define a strategy for how you're going to approach a game and win a game. So maybe you start out really aggressively and rush your opponents down quickly. Maybe you play for more of a late game style with really big units and try to get lots of Tiberium. I don't know, but you just have to determine your play style that fits you, the units that you have access to, and the way I think you can win in any given league's meta. So just know what your deck is all about. Secondly, you need to go in and look at each of the units in the game. Every single unit, you need to do your research and know what your own units are good against and what they're countered by. But also you need to look at all the other units that you maybe don't even have yet that you might see in a game, because you need to know what your opponent's stuff is good at as well and what it's weak to. So essentially, you need to know both sides of the countering equation. I need to make these to beat this. My opponent made this to beat these. And that's where the balance comes, because if you don't know how to react to their stuff, then you're not going to find success. So knowledge of what units do and what they counter is one of the most fundamentally important things in this game. Up third, you need to know which of your units are the strongest. So you're going to be leveling up units as you play in Command and Conquer Rivals. And sometimes that's going to be important for building your army or your deck so that you can play the strongest stuff. But also, in a pinch, you need to know what things are going to be the best to send out there on the field, both for any given moment, but also just their raw power level. Because, if you have a level 5 unit or a level 7 unit, and they're both doing similar sorts of things, building that level 7 unit might just go a little bit farther. You also need to have, on I guess tip number 4, knowledge of your commander's special ability and how to use it and when to use it and when it might be strategically advantageous to do that. So each of the commanders in the game has a special ability, and you not only need to pick the one you like or that fits your deck style, you probably need to know your opponents as well, just to ensure that you know how to counter theirs and how to play around theirs. Again, it just comes down to game knowledge. The fifth thing I think you need to know are all the different map loadouts, not only in your league, but eventually in the game as well. And that's something I'm going to dedicate some more time to at the end of this video, so just stay tuned if you want to learn more about map loadouts. But each league in the game has a different style of map, and that can really influence how you play. So keep that in mind. The sixth thing I think you need to know are which decks or armies you're likely to encounter in a given league. And of course, you can gain that experience just by playing a lot. Typically, I think people who are in a league have had a similar progression through the game. They might only have access to certain things. They're similar levels. So the kinds of units they're playing, they're going to mirror what they've seen in their opponents. So there are meta trends that tend to develop, and you need to recognize those, understand the patterns you're encountering regularly, and then build your deck to beat those same patterns and styles of decks. But unless you're observing, thinking critically, and gaining knowledge from that experience, you're just not going to get any better. And then I have 4 more tips, all of which are related more to in-game play as opposed to sort of game knowledge like the ones we've talked about so far. The first of those, or the 7th total tip, is the fact that you don't always have to control a control point. Sometimes it's okay to just let things go, take a step back, just observe, scout. You don't have to win via control points. As you're seeing right behind me right now in this game, I'm just destroying my opponent's base to win outright. So sometimes that's okay. That can be a reasonable way to win a game. And sort of on the same token, you don't always have to be fighting either. Like, I think a lot of people just always want to be engaged in the action, but you don't have to. Just hang back. Patience is key. Don't stress about the control point. Sometimes you don't need it. You can just wait, bide time, counter your opponent, be reactive as opposed to proactive. The same can go for fighting. If your opponent's outmatching you right now, just wait till you get some Tiberium, take a little break, build units to counter them. The bar takes a while to fill up on the missile silo. It's not going to launch immediately. You're better off, instead of freaking out and just going crazy trying to counter everything your opponent does instantly, or just frantically building bad units, just calm down, be patient, wait it out, and then you'll be able to make more strategically sound decisions moving forward. Now, beyond that, another thing I've seen people do is you don't always have to be building something. Just because there are buttons to push, you don't got to push the buttons. Again, patience is key. Wait to build things to counter your opponent. Even if you need to let a missile silo go off just to make a counterplay, as you're seeing right now on the screen behind me, that's all right. I'm willing to sacrifice now for a long-term gain so that I can set up a way, as you can see, build some flame troopers, kill your opponent's infantry very efficiently. You'll swing the resource battle and the kind of momentum of the game so heavily that you can still win out in the long term. I don't know if this game's a win or not behind me, but you can do that. And then finally, the final note I want to issue here is another one, and that's something that took me a while to learn. And my 10th tip here, I guess, is that extra Tiberium often just gets wasted. In other words, in the late game, if the game stretches on really long, you'll get to the point where you just have like 500 Tiberium that you can't spend fast enough. You just can't build units quickly enough. There's not enough things dying. There's not enough action. The queue for building things is longer than the Tiberium allows anyway. So on that note, keep that in mind when building out a deck and defining a strategy, right? Like, if you want to go for a late game style, you need to be able to spend a ton of Tiberium to substantiate that, or you're just going to have a ton of leftover Tiberium that you can't do anything with anyway. So maybe playing more aggressively, building things a little more quickly can work anyway, because as you can see, like, I'm already got 130 Tiberium behind me. Like, I'm going to be able to spend that, but it's coming in so quickly that I'm never going to have that much extra. So essentially all of those sort of gameplay tips come back to the aspect of being patient, taking your time. Don't just do things because you can. Do things because you should. And that said, now that we've kind of talked through some tips on getting better at the game, I think the most important thing next would simply be to discuss how to build a deck, because you know what the units do now. You know a little bit on how to play them better. So now let's talk about which ones you should be playing in the first place. So I'm going to show you one of my favorite decks right now. All right, so now that we've walked through some early tips, I also want to talk about building a deck and essentially what my deck looks like. And the deck I've found the most success with lately is this Nod deck that I played to Gold League on the Nod faction. And it all starts with the commander, Seth. And the reason I like Seth so much is because of his special ability, Drill Pod. He drops flame troopers almost anywhere on the map that you have vision. So you can drop them like just a couple tiles away from your opponent's base and backdoor them and just burn their base down really efficiently. And by surprise, often while you're distracting your opponent in the middle of the map, over control points, you just destroy their base single-handedly with a flame trooper. They're also just really good at countering infantry units. So I like the flexibility and sometimes the sneak attack that those provide. And speaking of sneak attacks, this deck has a nice way to start really aggressively as well, particularly with attack bikes. Now, I often will generate these first, the first thing I spawn, and I'll send them across the map to not only scout out what my opponent is doing, but sometimes get a really early kill on one of their Tiberium harvesters, which will then give me 100 extra Tiberium and essentially ramp up my Tiberium spend really, really quickly. So if you make a couple attack bikes and they go hard into harvesters, you can just wreck their early economy and gain a huge advantage that allows you to snowball the game really nicely. And this deck is split a little bit towards cheap units, but also some expensive units, as you'll see down here. I'm running Confessors and the Cyborgs as both late game infantry units that often I found, at least in Gold League, most people don't counter infantry really well. So the Cyborg gives me a way to lock down and counter vehicles and aircraft, whereas the Confessors give me answers to infantry really nicely. And I have seen other people play a lot of infantry in the late game in my league. So I feel like these give me a really good tool to counter that. And then filling in the deck, we basically have an assortment of different things here. Laser Squad's really good to have as just a cheap unit you can pump out to go take a capture point. If you're in an emergency situation, sometimes you need that really cheap flexibility. Also good at countering aggressive, like attack bike aggro strategies for my opponent. because these are really, really good at shutting down attack bikes early. So these can be a nice defensive tool if your opponent goes off to a fast start as well. And then we also have the buggy here, which serves as a cheap and mobile way to take control points, but also as an early infantry answer. If your opponent, for instance, makes tons of laser squads, this gives you a way to counter those at least somewhat efficiently. It's not perfect, but it gives you that flexibility and scouting potential in the early game as well. And then finally, the Banshee here, I just think this is my favorite aircraft. Kind of fills in some gaps on this deck because you do need an aircraft. And often I found that opponents will just not have a good way to answer aircraft. If they're building anti-infantry, maybe they're not anti-aircraft, and this can create some really cool things because of the burst damage that it provides. It can just like destroy some units instantly, which is fantastic and can really create some heavy swings. So altogether, a deck that can start fast but still has a lot of countering potential and some late game really strong infantry. This loses hard if they have great counters to infantry, but again, I've just found most people don't. So for me, it's sort of filling in the gaps really nicely. So now I'd like to talk about maps, because you build a deck, you got to know the maps too, because your map pool in any given league, and it changes per league, can really influence how your deck is shaped. So I thought I'd start in the Iron League because that's the one everybody starts with, and just it's simple. It's a 3-map pool, so it's good to get an understanding there. And you'll note from looking at the screen here that there are different map layouts, and for the record, yellow are control points, green are Tiberium, the sort of light grayish blue color are obstacles on the map that you can't path through, and then red and blue, of course, are the bases for each player. And you'll note some distinctions here. Each of these maps has 3 different control point tile sets, which will change later as you get into farther leagues. Some will not have 3, which really changes your strategy a lot. But you'll see some small changes. For instance, on Caged In there on the right, there are a lot more obstacles around the control points, which can make things like pathing really difficult because, you know, you might have a spot blocked and you might have to move around, which, you know, increases or decreases the viability of really mobile units. If they're fast, they might be better with all those obstacles because they can move around stuff. Or if you have really defensive units, you can sort of park them in those choke points and create problems. So instantly right there, your deck changes completely based on what the map looks like. And then for Slot Canyon, you've got split Tiberium, just one little Tiberium chunk way across the map. Like, does your opponent send their harvester to that one instead of the top one? Where do you send your early aggro attack bike? You need to get a quick start. And then in the middle, you've got control points that are touching, and that can create all kinds of new gameplay scenarios too, because suddenly, instead of being separate, you have units that are both controlling an attack point or a control point attacking each other simultaneously. And that can be crazy too. And just depending on which one of these maps you land on, your deck might be better or worse. So you need to understand what each league's map pool looks like and how you can best utilize your deck to support it. Here's another example where there's 5 completely different sort of maps. You'll see Middle Oasis there in the top middle. All the Tiberium's in the middle. So a Tiberium aggro strat is completely different. And your harvesters are always at risk because they're right in the middle of all the action. And that's cool. That changes every league's play style in the deck that fits it nicely. And I think that's something you should really be mindful of and keep an eye on. Okay, guys, so before I go, I just wanted to remind you of a few things about Command & Conquer Rivals. It is available right now across the globe. There is a link in the description for you to download the game. You can also open a nice little early bird bundle, which gets you some in-game currencies of various sorts and a nice little epic unit as well, which will help kick things off, getting you a strong deck right out of the gate. That's available through December 18th, so you don't have too long on that one. You might want to jump into the game quickly to make sure you get that little boost. All that said, I hope this look at Command & Conquer Rivals again made you a little bit better at the game. I still got a lot to learn. I don't really think the gameplay video there showcased all my best skills, but there's a lot to manage. There's a lot going on, and that's a good thing. Like, that shows how much strategic depth there is. I think I made like 15 mistakes in that game, and I still won at a pretty competitive level in Gold League. Of course, there's still a lot more leagues to climb, but nonetheless, it shows how much micro management is required, which I like. That's that old school real-time strategy element being updated in a modern era. You know, it's more quick, it's more intuitive. In a lot of ways, it's easier than old-time real TSs or RTSs, but I think Redwood Studios here has done a good job of adapting that for the mobile audience and making it accessible to me while I still have some room to grow and improve. So I like that aspect a lot. All that said, if you guys have any thoughts, questions, comments on Command and Conquer Rivals, of course, you can leave those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.